Michael Burry is perhaps the most infamous investor around right now, with his antics on Twitter and in the markets garnering millions of fans, but he's put his reputation on the line over recent weeks by picking maybe the most insane and out there prediction to ever come out of his mouth. Most investors these days are predicting a recession, many are predicting times to get tough, but what Burry thinks is going to happen is on a whole other level, and it isn't even close. He recently put out some information that gives us a rare insight into his mind, into what he thinks is going to happen next, and it's enough to shock the world. We're going to look into exactly what he's saying, we'll explain all of the context and make it abundantly clear what's going on, but it won't be a nice tale to tell. First, we need to discuss what is going on in the markets right now because things are far from normal. We've had a whirlwind of speculation, fear, and greed over recent months, and for a long time it was all pointing to one thing. A recession, a crash, a financial crisis, the end of the bubble, sometimes even the end of the world. Our economies were bleeding, suffering from multiple stab wounds, some given by soaring energy prices, others given by insane money printing that went on for years, and some from supply chain crises that drove our logistical systems into the ground. Now, while the wounds and their causes varied, they all had the exact same result as each other. A hammer and chisel working away at our economies, slowly crippling them and ensuring that a recession would come, that it would cause people to lose their homes, their jobs and livelihoods, and it seemed like there was no way out. But then, a few months ago, things started to look just a little bit better. GDP figures coming out from the United States weren't actually looking that bad, and people started to ask the question, hang on, are we actually going into a recession or not? Then we started to see corporate earnings perform better than expected. Most analysts and investors were expecting to see companies' profits fall, but they didn't, and actually they held up rather well. And then to top it all off, inflation readings started to fall too, with the CPI sitting close to 10% in the US at its peak, but falling to just 6.5%, a number that would have been terrifying 3 years ago, but today, that's actually an improvement. Rumors started to spread and circulate that maybe the Federal Reserve had done it. They'd attained the fabled soft landing by managing to bring inflation down to bear while not crashing the economy. Michael Burry, though, seems to think the polar opposite has happened, that actually things aren't looking good at all, and that we're now on a one-way track to market destruction, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, it's hard to stay focused, work hard, and try to find great new investment opportunities when you're constantly feeling distracted by not feeling great, not sleeping well, or trying to balance a healthy diet, especially when you hate to cook like I do. But AG1 from Athletic Greens makes it so much easier for me to make sure I'm getting all the vitamins and minerals necessary, everything I need and nothing I don't. It's got a neural supporting formula that helps with mental clarity and focus, which is insanely important when it comes to my finances. The adaptogens, micronutrients and vitamins actually help provide me with better quality sleep, and I've seriously noticed this over the last 2 weeks of drinking this daily. It's helped me to stay more mentally alert throughout the day, get more work done, more research for these videos, and look for more and better investment opportunities. Per serving, it's actually cheaper than a cup of coffee and actually offers something for your health. It's also really convenient and has just become a part of my daily morning routine. It's just 1 scoop, 1 minute once a day, and I know I'm set. I know we all love to hear about investing, but without being healthy, we can't possibly expect ourselves to make the right decisions. Investing in ourselves and our health is a massive part of that, so click the link down below in the description and you'll get a free gift with your first purchase of AG1, and you'll help out the channel. Now, on the 1st of January, Michael Burry tweeted this: inflation peaked, but it is not the last peak of this cycle. We are likely to see CPI lower, possibly even negative in the second half of 2023, and the US in recession by any definition. The Federal Reserve will cut rates and the government will stimulate the economy with spending, and we will have another inflation spike. It's not hard. Now, his position seems to be quite clear that yes, inflation is falling right now, and this is actually likely to continue with CPI readings steadily getting lower and maybe even going negative in 6 or 9 months, but this will happen at the same time as the recession kicks in, and maybe even because of the recession kicking in, and no one, not even the Biden administration, will be able to deny it. Then central banks will do as central banks always do when there's a recession. They will cut interest rates, slash smash them back down to zero as they did after the dot-com crash, after the global financial crisis, and after the COVID crash. Money printers will be turned back on, quantitative easing will kick off once more, and our markets will become flooded with cash. Stimulus checks will be handed out, tax credits will make their way back into our pockets in an attempt to get us to spend more, and it will actually work. Consumer demand will pop back up, but this is where more chaos will ensue. Burry clearly thinks that the problems behind our economies haven't been solved, just hidden, first and foremost being the supply chain crisis and the fact that there just aren't enough goods to go around. This problem, when combined with increased consumer spending, will result in a second spike in inflation, and we'll find ourselves in 2021 all over again, with the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell having to once again hike interest rates, pull up the drawbridge of free money, and crash our economy again. What comes then is a multi-year-long period of a stagnating economy and high inflation. Stocks failing to grow year by year, instead choosing to throw out just a couple of percent in dividends to try and keep their shareholders happy. An entire decade where people get no richer, where their assets fail to increase in value and the economy flails too. This would be called the lost decade, and it's one of the most terrifying prospects for anyone interested in investing because it's antithetical to all of our investing principles. We are constantly told that if we're patient, if we're smart and frugal, and simply invest a small portion of our income every month into solid, reliable funds like the S&P 500, then our future selves will be richer for it, and that will always be the case. But what happens when that stops? What happens when those returns elude us? What happens when people go to retire but they fail to make any money over the last 10 years? The fundamental problem here is that it's nigh on impossible to combat stagflation because the policies needed to end that period of economic failure are immensely unpopular. Any politician who is brave enough to do what's necessary will be rewarded with mud thrown at their house and a failed re-election bid, or at least that's what Burry seems to be suggesting will happen, and he isn't the only one. It's a tired tale these days, and we've known about this possibility for a long time. The reason so many people think this is actually going to happen though is because it actually did happen in the past, the last time the United States found itself in a period of high, stubborn inflation that couldn't be kicked away, along with an economy that just refused to grow. If we go back to the 20th century, America saw an incredible economic boom, but during the 1970s, everything started to fall apart. Inflation was high at the turn of the decade, and policymakers knew that they had to combat it, so they hiked interest rates, slowed down the economy, and started to tackle inflation. But they didn't have strong enough resolve to see it all through, so once inflation fell down to about 3%, the Fed decided to cut interest rates back down to stimulate the economy, and what happened? Well, inflation skyrocketed once more, well above 10% this time round. So once again, the Fed hiked interest rates up to even above 15% in an effort to tackle this inflation, and in the process, they seriously damaged the economy once more, but it did work as inflation started to fall down to just above 5%. The Fed, once again eager to get the economy growing again, cut rates as inflation fell, which then caused another spike in inflation up above 15%. At this point, Paul Volcker had to come in and fix this massive mess, and he sent interest rates up close to 20%, caused a massive recession and huge amounts of economic pain, but he did finally kill inflation about 15 years after it started to ravage the American economy. This all happened because fundamentally, fighting inflation is a very unpopular thing for a politician to do. Raising interest rates is incredibly unpopular because it makes just living so much more difficult. Your house costs more money, your car costs more money, your credit card debt costs more money, and this hurts. So when it's election time and there's one politician saying that he's going to cut interest rates and another saying that he's going to raise them to fight inflation, well, people just vote for the former. We've already seen how weak and ineffectual Jerome Powell and the rest of the Federal Reserve Board are. They outright lied to the American public for months on end, telling everyone that inflation would never pop up in the first place, and then when it did, that it wouldn't keep on rising, and then when that did, that it was transitory, and then when it wasn't transitory, that it was actually good for us. It's not exactly much of a leap to think that the Fed will make the same mistakes tomorrow that they made yesterday, and fundamentally, that's what Michael Burry thinks is going to happen. He thinks that after a few months of lower inflation readings, the Fed will face political pressure from the public, but also from the Biden administration to cut interest rates, especially as we get closer to the next election cycle. There is already loads of evidence proving that politicians would make this poor decision, like the fact that 17 separate states across the US issued inflation relief checks, or just free money, which is the cause of inflation in the first place. And before you say anything about which party this was, these states are red and blue, not just Democrat. Now, it is very easy to simply write all of this off as the ramblings of a madman, to claim that Michael Burry has predicted 20 of the last 2 recessions, and if you wander on down to the comment section, I guarantee you'll see many people who think they're the first person ever to spout that joke. But the reality is that he hasn't predicted 20 recessions over the last 2 years. He's predicted one recession that has been slowly evolving in front of our eyes, and Burry's track record is far better than most people give him credit for. When he started out investing, he didn't follow the hype and the crowd during the dot-com crash. He actually bet against that first tech bubble, and while every other brand new hedge fund collapsed, he made himself millions. When the 2008 financial crisis started to brew, again, he didn't follow the crowd and get caught up in the hype. He bet against the grain and made himself millions again. But a more important factor is that Burry has a proven track record of accurately predicting inflation over the last 2 years at a time where all of his critics have been ridiculously, laughably wrong. Back in February of 2021, when inflation was a mere 1.7%, actually below what the Federal Reserve wanted, Michael Burry put out this tweet drawing attention to the fact that an inflationary cycle was coming and that it would be a massive problem. In mid-2021, long before this current period of inflation had consumed all attention, and while the data was still only sitting at around 4%, Burry was warning us of stubborn inflation that would persist and not actually fall as the Federal Reserve was claiming it would. By late 2021, he was still saying the same thing, that inflation is far greater and more dangerous than anyone was giving it credit for, that it had not peaked and the fight was not over, and once again his prediction for inflation turned out to be 100% correct. Burry's track record when it comes to the last 2 years has been nearly flawless, especially when it comes to inflation, so it does stand to reason that we should at least consider the possibility that it might happen. We ought to prepare ourselves for what to do, how to protect our money, and how to invest under a scenario that he outlines, because in my opinion, he just might be right. Now, this isn't the only thing that he sees coming though, as Burry has recently been hinting about his trades and positions regarding the second largest economy in the world and how things aren't quite what you think over in China, which this video here explains perfectly. If you want to help the channel out and keep your mind sharp and body healthy so you can make the correct decisions when it comes to your money, make sure to check out AG1 with the link down below in the description.